Hi everybody, I'm Judith, a Derwent ambassador, artist and illustrator. You may recognise me from last time when we created a butterfly together in Procolour, or as your moderator in the Derwent Wellness group. Today Derwent asked me to do a paint along with you in one of my favourite media, which is the Inktense range. I've always loved Inktense because it's such a creative and unique range. So I chose for us to do a kingfisher together. Okay, so I'm just going to change the camera for you. Bear with me. Okay, so this is what we're going to be doing today. Now, as you can see, he's lovely and vibrant. So in the group, you would have had the files put in for your outline, which is here. Now, don't worry if you haven't drawn him out yet. He's a really simple outline. So my colleague is in the group now and they've uploaded the files for you. And it is a really simple outline. And I'm going to quickly talk you through some of the products because not all of you have got Inktense, or some of you are using watercolour and some of you are using pencils. So whilst I run through some hints and tips and tricks, for those of you who haven't had chance to draw the outline, this is going to give you the opportunity to either print it out quickly or to draw it onto there. The paper I've chosen today is a cold press watercolour paper. I like using a watercolour paper with any water-based media because it allows the Inktense to be really, really vibrant, and it allows the ink to settle into the pattern of the paper and to the texture of the paper. So when it dries, it stays vibrant. So the Inktense range comes in lots of different formats. The one we're going to be using predominantly today is the palettes. Now, there's palette 1, which is a general palette. I use palette 1 mainly for if I'm going out and about sketching or if I go to my art club. It's got a good palette range for if I'm doing animals or if I'm doing sketches and landscapes. Then I've got palette 2. Let me just put a light on as well. That's better. So then I've got palette 2. Now palette 2 is really good for botanicals. It's also got this really, really nice turquoise colour. I've made myself a swatch card for you to see. So it's got a really nice turquoise, sherbet lemon, bright orange and fuchsia. These are all really lovely colours. So I like to use these for botanicals and for things like kingfishers. And it was this palette the other night that inspired me to do this kingfisher. So this is the palette I'm going to be predominantly using today. And I always suggest that even though you get these swatches inside your palettes when you get them, which are really, really handy, and do keep them because they're great to put inside, I always make myself another one to keep because they do show up nicer on your own paper as well. So always have one to put in your sketchbook as well. Okay. Now some of you put on the page and in the group that you would like to use Inktense pencils, or that you only had Inktense pencils, and I want to make sure that you're included. So I put in there that I would show you how you could be able to use those. So for those of you who have Inktense pencils, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to find a scrap of paper. If it's watercolour paper, that's even better. Another point that I'd like you to note is you have a comments box on the live video. It looks like a speech bubble. If you want to ask any questions or make any comments in there, my colleagues are there available. Now, I don't myself answer any comments because the live feed gets very disjointed and it's too tricky to keep up, and it makes the video very disjointed for everybody else. But my colleagues are really, really good at answering questions, and they know just as much about these products as I do. So if you want to ask any questions, and then what will happen is afterwards I go into the video after I've uploaded it, and I will personally answer all the questions too for you. But believe me, they are great at answering the questions as I go along. Okay, so going back to the pencils. For those of you who have them, I'd like you to get a piece of watercolour paper and just have it out in front of you. Now, with your Inktense pencil, I'd like you to just scribble a patch of ink on the paper. So what you're doing is you're creating a palette. Okay? There's so many different ways in which you can use Inktense pencils. So I've just picked up the main colours that I would have in my kingfisher. Then you take a water brush. Now I like water brushes because I'm very clumsy at home. I tend to knock things over. The water brushes have water in the handle. They're pressure sensitive, so it doesn't release more water than you need to. You don't need to squeeze the handle. Okay, so the water comes out with the pressure that you apply. So you're turning your ink here into a palette, and then you can paint with it. Okay, so that's one way you can use Inktense pencils, is by creating a palette with them. So you can do a light wash. So for a nice light even wash, pick your ink up and just move it to where you want it to be. So if I wanted to add some orange, I'd take some orange from here, and then I would add it to where I wanted it to be. So you can still paint with your Inktense pencils. Once that dries, that's then permanent. That's what's important to remember with Inktense. Or just use them by blending one shade into the other with your Inktense pencils, and then blend them together. Okay, so just remember that this is for those people that want to use Inktense pencils instead of paint for this tutorial. And the same will apply for those who want to use coloured pencils. So it's not the purpose of this short exercise is for those not to be excluded from this paint along. So there's lots of ways that you can use Inktense pencils. You can even use watercolour pencils the same way. Okay? Now the videos are always uploaded afterwards, so you can rewind and go at your own speed. Okay. So going back to our kingfisher. The first thing I want to do with our kingfisher is we're going to put in this nice bright blue and green area. Inktense layers. It's a lot easier to use than watercolour because watercolour can start to lift off if you overwork it. Inktense is really cool because it's really hard to overwork it. It dries, it's permanent, so you can layer it. And you can layer it and layer it and layer it, and it doesn't cauliflower, it doesn't lift off. It's super cool stuff. So we're going to mix up a colour, and I'm going to take this palette first. Squeeze some water, so I want you to override the system in a water brush, or if you've got a normal brush, just put a little bit of water into your palette. As you can see, my palette's stained. It's not that it's a dirty palette, It's just stained because ink is naturally permanent. So I'm going to put some water in, and I'm going to take this palette. Just shows you how easy it is to get confused. So I'm going to take this turquoise. See how nice and bright it is. I'm going to make myself quite a thin wash. And I think I'll add a little bit of blue to it. Okay. Now we're going to go from this section of the back all the way down. We're going to move quite quick. I'm going to make sure I'm not covering the camera. Now the trick with this is to move quite quick. We're going to be quite free with our brush strokes. Because we want the texture to show up. Now again, you don't need to, if you're using a water brush, don't be tempted to squeeze the handle. Okay, so paint in the shapes of the feathers as you work. As it's drying, that will help to start forming patterns and textures as it within the hues and the tones of the blue. As it layers. Okay, so let's go work to this feather here. I'm going to keep going. Now if this was watercolour, we'd have a problem because already you'll see how much of the ink I've used. With watercolour, you have to always mix more than you think you're going to need because you'll get cauliflowers if you change the consistency. You don't get that with Inktense at all. Okay, so keep painting them in, working your way down. If you run out of the blue, don't worry, just mix some more up in your palette. So take some of the turquoise. Excuse me while I bend around on the tripod. And a little bit of the blue. And we're working quite quick. So you can see with Inktense you can fill in a really quite a large area quite quick. colour stays really vibrant. It's worth noting as well, you can use Inktense on a variety of supports. You can do this on fabric, on wood, on any porous material. So those canvas bags you can get for Bags for Life are fantastic for Inktense. They don't require heat sealing. There's nothing in Inktense that requires heat sealing. Okay, so we've got our feathers in here. Now normally I'd tell you that you can't make any changes to this while it dries. This has already started to dry at the top, so I'd like you to pick up some brighter blues, some brighter blue, green, just increase the depth of colour in this mix. Okay, so we're not going to be using a huge range of colours. And just round the top of his neck here, let's just make it a little bit darker. And let's paint some feather shapes in. Underneath here. Let's give him some texture. We want to bring him to life now. Okay, so if you're using Inktense pencils, you could be drawing into him as well. Let's add some shape just around this side. Now if you were using watercolour, there's no way I could even suggest you could do this yet. It just wouldn't be possible. It would be starting to lift off. And this is one of the reasons why in my art groups I do suggest that they buy Inktense, especially if they're starting out. Okay, so whilst that's drying off now, we're going to fill in this section here to join in around the side. This bit, I'd like you to take the ink we've got in the palette, dilute it a little, just by overriding the valve in your brush. Let me put that in the shot. Just dilute it a little. The difference here is, I just want you to put in a light wash. This whole section. All the way down to meet up here. Okay. Then whilst that's drying, pick up some of the darker blue. Now if I look at my palette, I've got violet and I've got navy blue. Pick up some navy blue, or a dark blue if you're using watercolour. Whilst this is still damp, just drop your navy blue just by the beak and you'll see it bleed in. And you can always soften this by just picking up some of your wash and just dabbing it and just letting it naturally bleed. And you can watch it, if I zoom in, just naturally bleeding. And then we're going to put some stripes across. So pick up some turquoise in this. I want you to just draw some textures into this wet area. And just watch them bleed and mix. And you can encourage that by adding a little bit of water and dabbing it. Again, pick up the navy blue or a dark blue if you've got one and just add just touches of it just along the edges, just to add a little bit of depth and shadow. And you can just watch it bleed a bit. Where it joins. I think that's one of my favourite bits. And we're just going to let that bit dry. And we're going to do the same with the back of this head here, whilst we've got these blues in our palette. Now, in our palette, we're just going to zoom out again. Okay, so in your palette, you've got a yellow sponge. And quite often people wonder what the yellow sponge is for. You might do what I did. When I first bought my palettes, a couple of years ago, I made a really silly mistake and I threw this out. A really rookie error. I didn't know what it was. I threw it out. I thought it was packing material. It's not. It's a really cool thing. It's for cleaning your brush on. Just run your brush up and down it. And what it does is it grabs the ink from the bristles of the brush and it cleans your brush off. And then all you do to clean it off is run it under the tap and put it back in. Yes, it will be stained because ink is permanent, but it cleans your brush. Don't do what I did and throw it away. I had to get a replacement. It was quite embarrassing really having to ask for a replacement. But it's a really cool thing and it helps clean your brush. Okay, so now we're going to look at the back of the head. So pick up your wash from here and we're going to paint in the whole of the back of his head. And again, don't worry if you can't keep up. I will upload it straight after. Okay, so we're going to leave this strip here for the orange. So we want to make sure it's quite wet. And now pick up some of the turquoise. And again, right, let's zoom in, because this is the fun part. Painting whilst it's still wet. It's painting these textures. So this is a wet on wet technique. You'll hear these techniques used. And sometimes you might hear them used in art groups, but you don't actually know what they are. You might not want to ask. And let's pick up some navy blue. and darken it round this eye. And let's paint some of these textures in. And I think this is the best bit, is watching the colours bleed together. Pick up some turquoise and let's paint his stripes in. And some navy blue. And if you want to make it bleed a bit, just dab the filaments of the brush onto the paper and the pressure will release the water from inside. Remember, it's a pressure sensitive system. And if you want to soften up any textures here, just pick up some of your wash water and just paint over them. So if they're just looking a little bit too bold, pick up your wash, just soften them. So if it's looking a bit too much like tiger stripes, just soften them up a bit. He was just looking a bit too tigery. Okay, brilliant. I'm happy with that bit. We need to let that a little bit dry. So what we're going to do is, we're going to clean the brush off. Now again, clean it off on the bit of sponge. Here, let me just zoom out. Okay, so run it up and down on your sponge. If you don't have that bit of sponge, if you've done what I did, and you threw it out, take a piece of kitchen roll and just clean it off. As I say, I rubbed it up and down on the sponge so you can see just how much that took off. I was painting dark blue a second ago, so you can see just how effective that is. And we're going to paint the orange on his chest here. Now if I go back to the original painting here, okay, so it's nice and bright. There's actually only two colours. And we're going to take this orange here, which on mine is bright orange. So let's add a bit of water here. Take some of the bright orange and we're going to make a loose mix. And I'm just going to paint this whole area down the front of his chest. Flick. We don't want a hard stop, a hard edge, because that will look unnatural. So you want to flick those brush strokes up along his edge and along his neck. And let's paint some orange all the way down his chest. Okay, so we've got a light orange mixing. And then we're going to increase the tone and the values. So pick up some more of the orange. And then let's paint into this wet area. Let me zoom in for you so you can watch it. You can watch it bleed. Okay, so let's increase the tone nearest the blue. Let me just check it's still on view for you. There we go. Especially underneath here. This is where it's at its darkest. So then we're going to pick up some red oxide or brown. If you haven't got red oxide, if you could use burnt sienna, that's fine. Now in palette 2, there's a lovely colour called red oxide. It's like burnt sienna with a touch of, I suppose, red. It's a lovely colour. So if you can pick up a bit of red oxide and just use it quite lightly, just to flick in some details and just paint whilst it's still wet into the deepest shadow area here. And also in this area underneath the fold of his wing. there. So as you can see how effective it is. Then flip. Okay, so the most effective way to get feathers is to put your brush on and then flick. If you don't do the last flick, you'll get a hard end and it will get blunt. And it's that blunt end that gives it the false appearance. And then you'll notice on your drawing there's a little section here, this little rectangle. We're going to do that next. I want you to clean your brush off. Now this bit is very, very dilute. I'm going to change things slightly. I actually want you to make sure my brush is really, really clean. This time, I want you to put water down first. And only pick up a very small amount of orange. So it's even more dilute than normal. Okay. And then I'd like you to pick up a little bit more orange. Just put it near the top and watch it bleed in. Okay, so the reason why we put water down first is I wanted to prevent the paper gripping the pigment too soon and too quickly. I wanted to prevent that happening. Okay, and then we're going to do the same with this section here. Okay, so we're going to wet this area first. Pick up some orange. And then I want you to blend the orange down. I'd also like you to pick up a little bit of sherbet lemon. Tiny, tiny little bit. So a little bit of yellow. It needs a little bit of orange just to reflect. Okay, so underneath the beak will reflect his orange chest. Now again, we wet the area just to stop this good quality paper gripping the pigment. So as you can see, even with the same colour, we've been able to create a whole different range of shades with the same Inktense palette. And we're going to do the same here. Okay, so halfway along his cheek, I want you to add water. So only halfway. And then I want you to pick up a little bit of the orange. So it turns it almost peach. Okay? However, pick up some of the orange and paint it straight on to the paper without wetting the paper first. So the same orange down the side of his cheek. Here. So you can see we used the same orange, just two different techniques. Now we can make it really, really bright by picking up. Okay, so the same orange again. Pick it straight up off the palette. And we can drop it straight in here so you can see even more vibrancy. And I'd like you to put it in this little bit here. And if you want to blend it in, just add some of your wash, just to make it even brighter. Pick some up off your palette and you can just add some brush strokes into this section of the chest as well, just if it's lost some of its vibrancy as it's dried. Pick up some bright orange off the palette and we'll fill in just this section here as well. And there's actually a little nose hole, a nostril there. Go back to your orange wash. Okay, so your orange wash is this section of your palette here. And I'd like you to put it there. And so you're going to be leaving this little white space. Pick up some of the orange off your palette, and just like you did with the head, just put some stripes in. Okay, so it's really important that we now leave this bit to dry. So I want you to clean your brush off. So you can use your sponge that you put with your palette, or you can use a bit of kitchen roll. Let me zoom out. So you can either use a bit of kitchen roll, or you can use your sponge in your palette. And we need to leave our kingfisher to dry for a little bit. His head and this area, to stop it bleeding. Now either you can move to palette 1 if you've got palette 1, or you can use the Inktense pencils. It's entirely up to you what you want to do or what you've got. Now, if I move to palette 1, what I'm going to do is we're going to do this little bit of trunk here. But I'm going to include everybody in this. Make a little bit of a wash water. Okay, so let's squeeze a bit of water into our palette. And then let's take some natural brown. I'm going to make a dilute wash of natural brown. So if you've got watercolour, you'd want to be taking a burnt umber and a bit of yellow okra into the mix. If you've got Inktense pencils, you could be using an amber. And we're just going to paint in the whole of the section of the tree. Now what you can do is you can actually override it by squeezing the water out the brush, just ever so slightly, not too much because you'll be surprised how easy it comes out. Let's just paint in the whole tree trunk. Now the sawn off end of the tree is a little bit lighter. So let's pick up a yellow ochre. And just paint a dilute mix of yellow ochre. Now every picture goes through what I call an ugly stage. Everything does. This is at its ugly stage. There's no doubt about it. Okay, so this is where I would use Inktense pencils. Now, for those of you who have Inktense pencils, you can use them wet into dry, dry into wet. These are great because you can add in textures. Okay, so the one I'm using here is umber. And you can just add bark texture into them. If you haven't got Inktense pencils, it's not a problem, just carry on by painting in your textures. Inktense, as long as you've wet the pigment enough, so every bit of pigment must have been wetted out in order for it to become permanent. Again, there's nothing in it that requires you to heat set it. Okay, so scumble in some textures. Now you can go back in with a water brush and just soften these up. You have a couple of seconds, not an awful long time, but you do have a couple of seconds just to soften things up with Inktense before that permanence happens. Okay, so if I was painting with Inktense, I'd take a mix and I'd be painting them in. Okay, so I'd be picking up a yellow ochre mix and I would be painting the textures in. You can get Inktense blocks as well. I tend to use Inktense blocks for more expressive painting, not for something like this. There's plenty of artists that can use them for things like this. I would say that they're far more skilled than I am. Okay, and then I'm using bark. And just draw some texture in with a bark. It's quite apt colour. Again, if you're painting, I would be using a dry brush technique. A dry brush technique is where you dry any excess water off your brush, pick your paint off a palette and use it straight from your palette. So you're not using wash water. Okay, and then you can soften any edges, get it right up to kingfisher underneath. Okay, so while that's drying, let's get our foot in. Now our foot is actually a lot darker than you think. The foot is created from, let's make up a mix of bright orange, a touch of cherry red, so bright orange, red, and surprisingly a little bit of red oxide or brown. It does need darkening up with a bit of brown. And just paint it straight in. And then whilst it's there, what I'd like you to do is pick up some red oxide. And just put some shadowing in it. Okay. And then we're going to add some Prussian blue, or Payne's grey actually, sorry, Payne's grey. Which is one of my favourite colours. Payne's grey in the palette number 2 is next to your white. Give it a good smush. Okay, so we're going to be picking this up. Oh, my favourite word, that's smush. We're going to pick it up straight from the palette. We're not making a wash. So you really need to break the seal on the block. Okay. And I'd like you to do this section first, going from the beak. goes from here up to the eye, flick it back, so it's quite a dry mix. And this is what gives you this feather-like appearance. Add some of the Payne's grey in here. And whilst you've got it on your brush, you can paint in some of the feathers. So it really is quite a dry mix. And this will fade ever so slightly. Add some here as well. And it's this point where you can paint in your eye. Now with your eye, okay, so I'm going to zoom in. This is really important. Your eye has a highlight. Your highlight is the most important thing in your eye. I want you to go around it. If you lose your highlight, that's where you lose the life of your eye. Okay, now you're not painting the whole eye in, just that little bit there, okay? Because the eye we're going to go over in black in a minute, but we don't want a flat eye. The eye is not totally black, so you're just doing the top section of the eye. Okay, so then pick up some more Payne's grey, and we're going to paint in the top of the beak, and only the top. Okay, so long sweeping stroke. If you do broken strokes, it's actually harder to get a straight line. If you do it like this, you end up with a rough edge, as you can see on the bottom. If you do a sweeping stroke, it's much easier to get a straight line. Wipe off your brush a little bit before you get to the end, and then dilute. So you're diluting it here, working around the nostril, so just to give it that natural blending in to your bird. Okay, so we've got a very strange eye going on here, but that's absolutely fine. That's what we want. Okay, because the bottom of the beak and the rest of the eye is black. Now you've got two ways to do this. You can either use black from your other palette, or you can use a black Inktense pencil, or you can use a black colour pencil. It's entirely your choice. So if you've got palette one, use the black from palette one. If you've got a black Inktense pencil, you can use the black from an Inktense pencil. It's up to you what you want to do. Or you can use black watercolour. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to use a black Inktense pencil. Okay, so it doesn't outline much. What I want you to do is just paint it in, draw it in. So you just... Inktense pencils, they're a nice colouring pencil on their own, but then magic really happens when you put water with them. Okay, so just put a layer in. As you can see, what I want to show you is the magic really happens with Inktense when you add water. That's why there's nothing quite like them. Well, there is nothing quite like them on the market. And you can use them on fabric, on wood, on paper, on canvas. Same with the eye. Okay, so on the eye, if you can, leave a little bit of white around the edge. And because we put Payne's grey down at the top. It won't be a flat black eye. And you can add in some details. Okay, so if you've got some watercolour pencil, watercolour paint, you can go over and add some details on it. If you've got your Inktense palette, you could pick up some blues and you can be adding some blues into the feathers. So let's add some blues into his feather, just under his wing. See, this is what's nice. What we said about Inktense layering. Might adding another layer of permanent ink here. It's not lifting off. Let's soften these edges. Let's add a bit of vibrancy to his head. Let's pick up some blue. Let's add it around this eye. And let's put a little bit around the back of his head. Let's go from here. If you wanted a nice soft edge, push down on the belly of the brush. It'll release a little bit more water than just the tip. Okay, let me show you that again. So let's add some blue here. Okay, so push down on the belly of the brush. It releases a little bit more water than just the tip, just to give it a softer edge and make an easier blend. Okay, so again, let's put some ink in here. Push down on the belly of the brush. And this is these fibres here. Okay, soft blend. So in one little brush, you've got so many different ways to use it. And in one small palette. And here's a really cool thing as well. Okay, so these palettes, you've got 12 colours in a palette. And out of those 12 colours, you can make 144 different shades. I got to 144 and I gave up. There's a Derwent ambassador called Robert Dutton, and he's done colour swatch shots. I think they're on the Derwent page at the moment as the cover picture. And if you look at those swatch charts, you can see from each of the colour palettes, you can make 144 different shades out of these before they go muddy. Okay, so we have created ourselves a really pretty kingfisher together in a paint-along that I hope you've enjoyed. I certainly enjoyed doing it with you. And we can do it in Inktense pencils, we could do it in colour pencils as well. I will go into the group and I will go onto the page and I will answer all of your questions over today and tomorrow. If you need any help, do please drop me a message. I'm more than happy to answer them. Let me just change the view round so I can, sorry about that, I can have a chat to you. So I'm more than happy to answer any of your questions. So do drop me a message, as are any of my colleagues on Derwent. So you can do it in Inktense pencils, any of the colour pencil ranges. You can have a go in blocks. There's certainly a lot of artists that are far more skilled than I am with blocks. And the Inktense palettes are super cool. Have a look at Robert Dutton's swatches and see just how many of the colour ranges you can, the colours you can get out of these are quite phenomenal. There's some bundles on the Derwent page that have been set up for you to make the whole experience easier as well, because we get a lot of questions about what products go with each other recently. So One of my colleagues has set up bundles, which is easier. There's the Derwent Wellness Facebook group, which is really active now. And it's lovely to see all of you putting your artwork and posting in there. And you're also supportive of each other. So do keep posting in there and encouraging each other to paint and draw and create. And I hope to see you all again soon. And thank you for painting along with me today.